Good morning, everyone. This is Chris Korapati. With me is my colleague Manish Mathur. Today's session, we will be covering achieving new product introduction excellence. The session is made up of the following topics. We will give a brief introduction, and following that, we have several topics that we think are very important from a new product introduction excellence perspective. These are some of the items that are also not necessarily covered well or supported properly. So that's one of the reasons why we've picked some of these topics today. The last 10 to 15 minutes, we left it for questions and answers. It is very likely that you have questions as we are covering the material. But for the sake of continuity, we would like to answer all the questions to the end. However, you can type in your question in the Q&A tab of your Zoom bar. One advantage is that the questions and answers for those questions will be distributed to the attendees as part of the post-session follow-up, so that we can share the videos and the material as well with you. So if you can type in your question in that Q&A tab, those will automatically get included in the post-session material distribution. Okay. With that, a little bit about Cambrian Lab. We are a Northern California-based company with teams in different cities in the country. We have expertise in new product introduction and supplier development, and serve a lot of companies in the automotive, high-tech, semi-medical device industries. Our expertise includes both operational topics related to NPI, supplier development, as well as some of the supporting technology, including ERP systems, sourcing systems, engineering systems. So it's one of the things that we'll show you today is how the practical approaches to making NPI excellence possible intersects with some of the technology components, and what are some effective techniques that we have developed, and by uncovering how organizations and people actually work. Okay. Both of us have 20 plus experience, operational experience in manufacturing and design, as well as software solution development. So we are wearing the hat of an operations person here. When we thought about, what are some of the effective techniques and approaches that organizations can use to achieve NPI excellence. Okay. If you really look at NPI, one of the things that struck us is there is still a sense of NPI equivalent to designing a product or a system and be done with it. Now, of course, Elon Musk here says, and we should respect his opinion because he's been through this, what we call NPI and production hell. It's while great design and engineering of products are critical, manufacturing and supply chain, which is really what the NPI process is orders of magnitude more work. And that is definitely the case, and you'll see that in the next slide. Adding to that, there are a couple of aspects that are somewhat new in the last 3 to 5 years, makes it even more complicated, the NPI process. One is even simple products are fairly intricate now. They have electronics, connected systems, and so on, which makes NPI process a lot more intricate. Second, throw in the complicated and risky supply chains that you have today. The job of NPI for the teams has become even more complicated and even harder, as a matter of fact. So that's the new landscape that we are dealing with. Now, in terms of orders of magnitude of work, if you think about it, a lot of equivalents of NPI tend to be around product development. Whereas if you really look at, hey, what does it take a design to be ready for production in volume at a based upon to support or to fulfill the designer's intent, as well as cost, quality, and other considerations that are equally important or even more important when it comes to customers and consumers. So as you can see, there is a lot of work, a lot of streams, a lot of departments that actually come together and make it all happen. And there's just a lot of work that needs to be done, for NPI to be successful. Unfortunately, we still observe the presence of either virtual or real silos between different departments, kind of slowing it down and making it hard. It's even more complicated if you have suppliers doing much of the work for you, whether it be design or subsystems or when manufacturing, assembly, and test. Right. So this is something that tends to be still an issue. Ideal scenario is that most functions are next to each other or overlapping, so the information flow and the process flow is seamless. Ideal scenario, right? May or may not happen, and that's our goal. In addition to that, while the cross-functional teams may be possible to put all of them in one room and make it all happen, you still have a lot of different disparate systems and teams spread all over the world that need to work together, synchronize, so that NPI and production actually happens. So there is another aspect of orchestration or synchronization that still is there, where there are still a lot of information systems to people, to processes, to actual physical systems, manufacturing systems. All of that needs to happen too. So there is definitely an upside. It's perhaps the single most important process for most organizations, NPI, and uncovering every potential improvement and making it real is definitely a worthy goal, right? Because these are some of the benefits that you actually do get. Now, the next topic. One of the things that we've settled on, we've looked at this NPI process for a while now. Exactly what is the mode that makes the most sense? And we've settled on process orchestration as the way to go. And the reason being, if you look at NPI for different products and industries, there are various modes of new product introduction. To the left is medical device, where it is broken down into 5 phases here, but there is a very clear gate between each of those phases. I mean, you cannot move to the next phase until you cross this gate. And then the reason is the risk and the cost of different phases are very high. So people want to make sure that before we move to the next phase, in this case, for example, after you do an opportunity assessment, whether you want to move ahead with concept and feasibility, right? Or even more, once you finish the feasibility phase, do you really want to go design and develop? Because this gate, there is a significant amount of decision making, and until people agree on it, there is no point moving, because the cost of moving to the next phase is very high. Compare this to a advanced product quality planning 5-phase model, which is, there's quite a bit of overlapping phases, because in most cases, customers or organizations decide to do an NPI product and they continue until the production process, because the decision making, the risk between the different phases is not that high. Any risk or risk assessment or evaluation, feasibility is already done during the concept phase. There may be some hiccups that may happen in different phases, but by and large, organizations decide to engage or support a new product, and they will do it until production actually happens. And whatever volume production runs, etc., they need to do, they'll do it. So different modes of NPI process that happens. Interestingly, we have seen NPI supported by different modes of working, or at least if you see it as a process or a project. We've seen project-based NPI process, NPI. We've seen certain processes for supporting NPI, and we've seen lately in the last 5 years, even hardware companies have decided to adopt Kanban boards or using sprint, agile product development. We've seen all of that. And unfortunately, one of the things that we find is that these are very, I'd say, tactical, uh, data entry type of project management or NPI processes. Which is, people are keeping track of these projects and manually keeping up with it. And there is no guarantee that things will actually get done. Just because there is a project task means, what happened actually for the task? What is the underlying process underneath it? Do we know if things have happened? Is it properly done? All of that, there is no guarantee. Just looking at a project or a Kanban board, things are actually happening to the point. So that's a challenge that we've seen. And our experience has been that NPI is generally a combination of projects, process, and workflow. And it actually requires an orchestration type of approach. And this is when I will actually go into the demo. So we've used the workflow engine to support different modes of NPI program management or NPI process. You can see advanced product quality planning, stage gate product development process, and medical device NPI. Just to give you a little bit of a heads up on, what is this orders of magnitude of work that is involved in NPI. If you look at it, you can easily assume that, hey, if I run an APQP program or medical device NPI, if I look at this workflow, if I complete these activities, it'll be done, right? That is not actually how it works. If you look at the actual day-to-day NPI and all the underlying work, magnitude of work that is involved, there's a lot of product planning that happens, there's product engineering that happens, component engineering, sourcing, supplier development, validation and verification, quality systems setup, right? All of that is actually part of NPI. And your NPI process needs to accommodate or at a minimum link and initiate and keep track of everything that is happening as part of the NPI program, right? So that is a challenge most NPI, let's say, approaches struggle with today. Okay, so now coming back to what's the right approach or effective approach, we'd call it. There is no such thing as a right approach, especially when it comes to NPI. You have to settle on a process or an approach that works for your organization. Many organizations pick something like a advanced product quality planning. It's very popular in automotive industry, but it is recently being adopted by aerospace and other industries that do design and manufacture complicated products. So if you look at advanced product quality planning, it is a fairly well-defined, phase one, plan and define, phase two, there's a phase one review, phase two review, and split into 5 phases. And if you actually look at the phase, although this looks like a phase gate, at each phase, there are multiple tasks that actually happen. So it's a combination of both a workflow plus a project-oriented view here, right? So one, because you have to go through these phases. You can do that either simultaneously, at a minimum, most of the time, while there is some parallel simultaneous work that happens, it only happens with some overlaps, not complete overlaps, because there is no point doing manufacturing planning if you don't have, for example, design done, right? So, or doing process design and development if you don't have all product design and validations being done. So you need to really think in terms of, how do we structure the type of work? And that's one of the things that we have learned over time is, if you're thinking of a combination of product process, what is the ideal way people can actually accomplish this and, meaningfully support an NPI process well. Now, one of the things that you will see is that if we do in fact have these projects going on as part of a workflow, right? You also need to be able to actually follow through on these tasks. The good example here is, we need to do release engineering drawings for Z4X, right? What does that mean as a task? It is not something that we've observed where somebody goes and says, yes, I completed it. In fact, it actually leads to what we call follow-on workflows, which is, release engineering drawings is a very well-defined process for most companies. And if you look at that, it includes quite a bit of, especially for a board, there is in the electrical engineering board designs, there's component qualification, prototype builds, and once testing is done, it is released to production, and there are all the MES systems set up and so on that happens, right? So there is actual, fairly substantial amount of work underneath each of these tasks. Often it is defined as a workflow that needs to be finished. It is cross-functional. There is design, engineering, there are actual specific regulatory aspects to it, different to it, and it needs to follow a workflow method while handling all the information that is dealing with this specific activity, right? So here in this case, we are actually releasing an RF front end, which includes all of this board and different components. There's costing that happens. So there is quite a bit of what we call connected workflows underneath that project phase gate type of approach that people adopt for new product introduction. And for us, this is a far better approach so that people are cross-functional teams are engaged, are part of the flow. The data that is managed or required to support the NPI process is all accessible and visible, and you can actually follow through with underlying workflows for each of those tasks. So you can think of each of those tasks being translated into one or multiple sets of workflows, and only when those workflows are completed is when the task is actually completed, right? So it is a natural way to keep the linkages between NPI tasks and actual workflows and keep the status intact, visible for everyone. So you could theoretically go and look at how is my NPI program coming, so you can see all of those different tasks. Some of those tasks are again into some other workflows, and so you can keep track of everything from a visibility perspective. Now, it can be at a high level, or this can even be done for subsystems and individual components. It doesn't have to be just for a high-level program. So all of these are fairly valid approaches. Now, another approach that we've found to be useful is, in this gated stage gate type of model where people go through again there are different views, right? If you look at initiation, opportunity, and risk analysis, that itself can be a separate workflow instead of a project oriented. So here in this case, the phase one project is actually being done as a separate workflow in itself, right? And it has been completed. So as a result, we can go back and do the doing in the review phase right now, and which multiple cross-functional teams, again, everything in workflow engines, the way we approach them are cross-functional. So you always have different roles participating. Depending upon the program, appropriate people can join in as particular roles, and then you go through this, whatever is defined as the NPI process. In this case, while it is defined as a high-level stage gate process, the stages themselves are defined as individual flows, right? So this is a program phase, or phase one is done like this, with all the activities, and these can go on and on and on, right? In terms of whether we want to keep them as tasks or individual workflows by themselves. So that's a flexible approach to handle NPI. Now, if you notice, we are in the stage gate review that is happening right now. So one of the challenges that we've always found is, what is an effective way of doing NPI reviews? Right? Most of the time, we have seen a lot of information, data. People get together in a room, might even spend like hours together for a day, and review various aspects of the NPI program. One of the tools that we've developed, based upon what we have observed in the industry as well as with our customers, is how should we do an NPI review for a product, right? And NPI reviews have different facets, in our opinion, and you can determine what those facets are. For example, in the case of Z-Phone X here, the organization decided, hey, these are the 5 main facets for an NPI, and some of them are valid depending upon what phase you are in the NPI process. For example, if you look at NPI Readiness, there are many elements of NPI Readiness, like validation, PPAP, risk assessments, supplier identification, qualification, and so on, right? So, and those things vary. The need, the requirements of these facets or elements of NPI Readiness vary for subsystem to subsystem. So you can keep track of that. And again, underlying all of this, the way the parts, the subsystems, and their readiness is updated is through workflows. Is required yes or required no. Completion status is all happening underlying in the NPI using workflows. But this is a good way, at least our customers have thought, hey, if we can have a review workbench, you're going to call it NPI review workbench, which are all of these different facets. So in this case, it does look at all the components as well as the suppliers of those components that are making it. How ready are they from an NPI perspective? Another facet is exclusively looking at suppliers. Hey, are our suppliers ready, and what are the different elements of that? In this case, only the first 2 are important, where we are looking at these 3 elements of supplier readiness. Another aspect is cost management. It is a surprise to a lot of people right now that what is started off as a target cost, by the time you're going through different phases of NPI, actual cost may look very different. And because of a number of elements, not only are there component costs, but there are a lot of other, should cost analysis for each of those specific components that may result in your actual cost, widely varying, from the target cost. So this is something that, you need to be able to keep track of from a NPI review perspective throughout the life cycle. The thing is, you want to provide, full, firstly, support whenever and where needed to support an NPI review process. You may be doing this 10 times throughout the NPI cycle, or every week, right? You should be able to do this very easily. And that's one of our goals with this NPI review workbench, is to be able to do that, for different facets of NPI. And as you're getting closer to doing NPI builds, you also need to worry about inventory. How much do you need? How much is available? And a lot of times we have seen that NPI inventory interferes with production inventory. So you need some capacity to be able to manage NPI inventory separately from total inventory available, right? So those are some of the aspects. And then the other issue that we have seen recently is the issue of lead times. Whether it is NPI build, lead time is an issue even for production right now, but it's even more problematic for NPI because there is no guarantee that you will be allocated any at all, given how low volumes are involved in NPI process. So that's something that you need to really keep track of if you're planning a build, NPI builds. It's not uncommon for many of our industries where there are builds in up to 100 or a few hundreds of NPI builds from a testing and validation perspective. So these are some elements that one of our customer thought is important. So your NPI review workbench needs to be able to support that. The other thing, once you're done, supporting NPI elements, is one thing that we have seen is the importance of NPI sourcing, how central it is. In NPI sourcing, there is a feeling or thought that all I have to do is do some RFP, RFQs, select the supplier, and be done with it, right? That's where my NPI sourcing ends. In fact, in our opinion, and it is true for many organizations, that NPI sourcing is not complete until the supplier is shipping in volume. This is all happening after post-production, shipping in volume at the level of quality that you need. Okay, that's when NPI sourcing job ends. And actually, as a matter of fact, it doesn't end because there could be problems coming up during the production phase that needs to be addressed. Now, one of the things that we also highlight here is, it is past the time that cost is the only consideration anymore. First of all, in many supply chains that we are seeing, you just need to get the availability and allocation to begin with. At this point, it might change in the next couple of years, but so you can, for a time being, throw cost out of the equation and see, what is the overall supplier relationship that we want to maintain. Can we get allocations? Can we get the products? Can we reduce lead times? Is the product quality good? So those are different considerations that you should be really concerned about. Now, if we look at our NPI review, there's still a lot of components that don't have new products, or other suppliers, PEM, external source, but we don't have any suppliers. How do you actually get NPI sourcing processes started, right? So we actually worked with some of the industry to understand what are some of the effective techniques to support NPI requests. So when we look at NPI sourcing, it not only covers at least getting quotes and proposals from customers. You have to first identify the right suppliers, and that is often done by your engineering teams, but it doesn't necessarily have to be like that. It's a combination of engineering plus sourcing that work together to find the right supplier. Once the supplier is discovered, you have to do RFP responses. In this case, for example, just to give you a workflow that we have developed, which is fairly effective and easy to get RFP responses from multiple suppliers. So here in this case, we're going to get A10X production quotes from, for different quantities and some of the requirements based upon the needs of your organization, and get the information from these two companies, right? So, and we've given some preliminary scoring. Following that, we do an actual sourcing evaluation. The sourcing evaluation is something where, as a cross-functional team internally within the organization, you determine who is the right supplier. You can use the combination of information that the supplier provides, as well as your own internal assessment of the weightages and what score do you want to give for each of those suppliers, right? And gives you a better, more, I would say, quantitative plus qualitative approach to finding who is the right supplier. At the end of the day, you might decide that you want to give business to both, and we'll show you why. But you need to understand, what the supplier, evaluations are, assessments are, and what they can actually provide. But in our opinion, sourcing doesn't stop there, right? You just said, okay, they two, both Intel and Qualcomm seem to be the right suppliers. You're not ready yet. You still have to do some audits, right? Audits, that suppliers are able to perform and support the required quality and procedures and consistency that you're expecting, right? And this can be done by your internal team, or suppliers can do self audits. And then if you look at it, there is also first article inspection. A lot of organizations also use something called production part approval process. And this is a gate that most suppliers have to pass through before they can start shipping products to you, right? And packaging. So it includes different elements that supplier has to fulfill. And one of the things that we have worked on is to make sure suppliers can actually work with you very seamlessly. We have a supplier view of these workflows. So here in this case, I'm logged in as a supplier. And if I include, for example, in this case, I've added Intel as the supplier representative. And in this workflow, supplier representative provides a lot of the information that is needed, right? So they can actually join in on those workflows and actually provide the information needed for PPAPs, etc. Right? So this is now in suppliers' desk. So we've made these workflows accessible and make suppliers as participants of this workflow, so that they, as if they are part of your own team, right? They can come in and go out of what needs to be done. It's also fairly secure in that the only components that they are providing is something that any workflows related to that, like for example, A10X suppliers, Intel gets involved in workflows where A10X is a key component. So the other way is you can also invite suppliers to participate in any of the workflows that you have. So, but these are some of the gates and checks and balances that you have to go through before you say, yeah, supplier is ready and my job as NPI sourcing lead is finished, right? So there's a lot of work that happens before suppliers are ready. And that is part and parcel of NPI sourcing. It may be done in conjunction, in collaboration with your engineering teams, but it needs to be done. Okay, and the next topic that we have definitely, it's probably the burning topic for many industries and companies, is component engineering. And component engineering, primarily we are talking about semiconductors and electronic components right now. There are three. The first one is just a problematic situation right now: component engineering and supply. Right? If you are in NPI supporting any product system that has significant electronics components, you are dealing with this, right? One is shortages, widespread across the board for different commodities. People thought lead times would be coming down by now, but they're still going up, and there is no letdown on when they'll start coming down. Perhaps next year. That's the expectation. Nobody knows. The other thing is when you're supporting your engineering, as a component engineering person or as a sourcing person, your job now is to make sure that you actually have allocation, because without allocation, there is no guarantee that your POs or anything will be fulfilled. And we also think it is, you need to really do, for certain types of commodities where possible, aggressive multi-sourcing. Right? When you do multi-sourcing, obviously there's drop-in replacements, but you might also want to work with your engineering team to find, for them to qualify alternates, etc., so that if one supplier is becoming problematic, then you can switch to another one, or at least split the quantity. The other thing is that you definitely need to know what an impact of a specific component is. One of the tools that we've developed for some of our customers is a component impact analysis. It actually looks at the component and navigates up through the bill of materials to find out, what are some of the finished goods that are being sold, and how much existing sales orders and forecast is in the system. And this is the amount of impact that this one component has, right? It could be very low level, something that people miss, and yet it can have a very high impact from a revenue and customer fulfillment perspective, right? And that's something that a lot of companies suddenly are finding, that some low-level resistor or a microcontroller can shut down production lines and reduce your deliveries, right? So these are information that you need to have. And then later on, I'll cover shortly, how do you deal with all of the manufacturing part changes and manufacturer part end of life. That tends to happen quite a bit right now. This is a continuous process that you need to manage. So if you look at, for example, one of the products that we are looking at, I will open the Z-Phone X here. If I open the BOM, this example, there is a significant amount of what you would call multi-sourcing that is happening. There is also a given allocation, and all of them are production certified, right? So you're buying 70%, 20%, 10% from each of these companies and being used in production. On the other hand, you might decide for memory, you have 4 components, 4 manufacturer part numbers qualified. But given that there is an allocation, you're confident that keep only, for now, buying only from Micron, but the rest can be purchased, but not buying it yet. Okay, so these are strategies that you can use to have a little bit more resilient supply base. And it's a little bit against the I would say, supplier consolidation strategy that you have. Maybe something you need to give it a pause for a while, the supplier consolidation, especially when you're dealing with lots of different electronic components, or even any mechanical systems and others as well. For now, our recommendation is that you need to do a lot more multi-source. It's a little bit work, but it is worth the work and the effort that you're putting in right now. Okay? You can revisit supplier consolidation maybe 5 years from now, but not today. Okay, and so we've also provided a lot of workflows that tend to be pretty common in these industries, which is there's just a lot of work that happens around. We come back here. Just component changes. There are so many. Anytime there's a manufacturing part change, you may have to deal with the type of work that happens around the component change requests here, right? So if you look at, go back to the other one. This is, you get a PCN notification from some of your manufacturers saying, hey, I'm doing end of life of this manufacturer part number. And suddenly you have to now go find another guy, another supplier, that can do some, if not drop-in replacement, easily, put in where it is, right? And you have to go through quite a bit of internal assessment, right? Purchasing and quality, and depending upon the type of component and component risk classification that you assign, and then update these component changes. So a lot of these, you need to be able to process them fast. And then we'll look at some of the end-of-life issues that come up. So we've seen, fairly important workflows that happen around PCNs. Like whenever there's a PCN, it may have a widespread impact. For example, in this case, we are still with that Z-Phone X, where one of the manufacturers issued a PCN for this manufacturer part number, right? Your goal is to find out, hey, this PCN, what is the impact of the PCN on my components? And then this step here, it finds, okay, this is a baseband internally. That is the one which is going to get affected. And this baseband is used in all of these different assemblies. This is the final assembly, Z-Phone X, Y-Phone, communications module. That means you have to deal with all of the changes that happen here. I mean, there can be many strategies from a PCN analysis perspective. Typically, we go into what we call end-of-life strategy at this point, right? Should we, depending upon, is there a replacement part or not? And then we can go ahead with do a last time buy. Those types of strategies seem to be something that you need to support as part of. So this is a component end of life, which is what is happening for baseband, right? So we did find the Skywork, so we didn't have to do much. But in the meantime, we just looked at what is the demand, and because it's going to take some time to qualify Skyworks, right? So you need to go ahead and issue last time buy POs, etc. So these are the types of workflows that are very, very common, yet it is done in a very ad hoc fashion. So you need to, we've developed all of this so that it makes the whole NPI process a lot faster and seamless. Okay, and finally, we've also did a little bit of work around what we call, sustaining engineering and supplier development, where, you're always, where suppliers need some help as part of NPI, right? Where, you may have supplier capability in the advanced, they may need some improvement if it is an existing supplier to support a new program. You do that using a variety of techniques, activities. You first do a performance assessment of the supplier and set up supplier development activities. Okay, so that's another approach that you can think of as part of the NPI program. Okay, it's something that is very closely associated for a lot of NPI sourcing and NPI program itself. Okay. Now, there's always this, once the product goes into production, we have sustaining engineering kicking in, right? So if you look at our NPI phases, there's, once you are post-production, you're almost into the what we call a sustaining engineering phase. Now, for many industries and organizations, sustaining engineering is a substantial part of the life cycle, right? There are new variations that are created as part of sustaining engineering. There are brand extensions, product upgrades, new features are added, product changes are done, product and software updates are done, right? So there's a lot of work that happens in sustaining engineering. And what is the best way to do this, right? We still think, you should treat sustaining engineering also like an NPI program. And use some of the same techniques because you want to really manage a timely sustaining engineering, as part like a release cycle or something like that, and pool all the sustaining engineering drivers. You can see them as three areas. One is failure and quality events. They just definitely require their own sustaining engineering cycle, or some of them may be urgent enough that you even do address them immediately without even thinking about, when should I do it? The other two, which are product and process improvements and supplier driven changes, right? PCNs, EOL notices, and any supplier changes that they are pushing through. They need to be kind of synchronized and organized as like a release schedule or something like that. And the reason being, imagine, you as a manufacturer dealing with PCNs, right? Every time a product change notice comes to you, you are internally reacting and have a lot of work to do so that you requalify or change your own product or make minor adjustments and then update. That same thing every time you change is happening to your customers. Okay, so it is a good idea to kind of reduce the burden on your customers by pooling together these drivers of sustaining engineering. So that's why we've actually created a sustaining engineering kind of workflow or a program workflow that actually looks at, hey, what are the aspects that we are covering as part of the sustaining engineering program? What are some of our goals? And what are the elements that we are doing as part of this sustaining engineering program? And this can be saying, this is for Q2. And you can do the same for Q3, right? Depending upon how you are handling these changes. Like I said, any catastrophic failure, you may have to just do it without any of this setup, react immediately. But generally, it is not a bad idea to do these sustaining engineering programs for a product in a fashion so that you're periodically releasing these changes to your customers, because all of the changes that you're doing more often than not are heading to the market, impacting your customers. So it is a good idea to synchronize as well as schedule these types of changes together. And if you look at this workflow, it does include, again, we are looking at all the different themes and the work gets done. For example, in this element here, if you look at the PCN, it is just not a task or an element here. It actually you can create workflows to follow through and complete all of that. Same thing with resolving screen overheating failure, right? That in fact actually leads to, look at the failure failure report here. This is the screen getting very hot. It's a problem. It is part of sustaining engineering program because it is not a catastrophic failure. It can be done as an update, as part of a scheduled update. And this actually leads to quite a few things. There's a corrective action request. There's actually an ECR request to do component changes, engineering changes, and then implementing that engineering change. So you can pool all of this as part of one program and follow through with all of the activity that happens underneath as workflows. So yeah, I mean, we've working with the industry, we've found out some very, very effective techniques. These are certain approaches that not well supported in the current landscapes, even both as a product or as an organization. It's just that, and there is no supporting structure, like, the way, we are able to do it with workflows and assessments and review, NPI review boards, so on and so forth. So you need this whole infrastructure to make this happen, but it's also not that hard to set it up. We think some of these changes and approaches will definitely and fairly in a more practical and effective fashion improve your NPI process, leading to a level of excellence that is, I think, very useful for your organization. Okay, so with that, I will stop. Wanted to leave with, this is, all of these techniques have been proven to be very successful in several industries. One thing we do know is that the way the workflow engine works, it's very, very easy for people to adopt the way things happen. And it's also, well liked. So we'd be more than happy if you find some of this compelling to support, like a test drive or a free pilot for your NPI or sustaining engineering processes. Okay, with that, we'll open it up for any Q&A. We will leave the Q&A open as long as everyone stays on the session. So you can type in the Q&A into the Q&A tab over there on the Zoom bar. One of the things that often comes up is, how about the connectivity to, we see a lot of information about parts, suppliers, and, pricing, lead time. Where is that information coming from? So this is, there was a question on how does this work with Cogents. So Cogents is a set of capabilities developed on top of zFlow. So it's just a package that we have developed, this whole thing around NPI processes and this thing. So it is just a package. It's the same thing. As you can see, this is used in multiple places for supplier development as well as NPI. So we've developed quite a bit of functionality around NPI, and we call it Cogents. Yep. So the question that comes up, where is that information coming from? So one of the things that we do have here is connectivity to different systems. So if you look at it, we have the engine connected to workflow, SAP, Agile, Team Center. All of them are sources of different types of information. So if you open, for example, the NPI review, right, and look at the inventory. So this inventory actually typically comes from systems like SAP, right? And this available inventory, and sometimes they allocate inventory. For example, NPI teams have their own storage location, so that storage location is allocated for NPI usage, right? So that means we know the available inventory for NPI builds are 100, 200, and so on. The BOMs and the suppliers, generally come from either engineering systems directly. We've written loading interfaces to Mentor graphics, those types of systems, as well as Agile, etc., where there some level of information is already there. That could be the starting point. It does. You can also create your own information here. It's fairly, a lot of customers use it for some of the core part release and product release processes, this workflow engine. So it's pretty common. You can do that, those steps directly here. The other question that comes up is if, can this involve suppliers, right? How do suppliers get involved in the NPI process itself? So we do allow suppliers to participate in any and all of these workflows. One of the fundamental things that we've designed these workflow engines is to be able to actually extend these workflows to your supply chain, to the suppliers, in some cases even directly to your customers. So in which case, we do keep track of suppliers, and you have the capacity to invite them to be part of this workflow engine. And once you invite them, you have to, depending upon how you design your workflows, you can just directly include them in a workflow, or in the case of, let me show you, in the case of, for example, supplier PPAP, right? So here in the case of supplier PPAP, we just invite, because it is directed for Intel, we invite Intel as a supplier representative. Some of this can be also done automatically if you just select the supplier. We might see that example, for example, here in POs, right? So if you have a PO and the PO is directed to Intel, vendor name Intel is already selected, it automatically adds Intel directly into this workflow. Okay, and that's for a lot of high volume processes, that may be the approach that you'd want to take. We can also determine if a part change or etc. that happens, and the part is provided by Intel is one of the qualified suppliers, you can also include it that way. So many ways to involve suppliers into specific workflows. Your presentation for questions list Rockwell automation. It's more of an integration to Rockwell automation. A lot of the NPI, our systems are connected to MES systems. They are, and we feed the bill of materials and routings, etc., to MES systems, and the integration happens to a lot of these bombs, etc., are directly fed into systems like not only just SAP but also MES systems that require production versions and other recipes, etc., for NPI, for production orders, etc., as a master data. So our integration to Rockwell systems and MES systems is primarily to push master data into those systems. Okay. So if there are, we'll leave the chat on. We'll stay for 5 more minutes. And so as a follow-up, what we'll do is we'll send the presentation and the session materials. The video also will be created out of this, of different sections. We'll send that as and when Zoom transcribes the video, as well as some of the Q&A questions. And we will send it out. Our contact information will be there in the. Is there a file part item limitation to the system? There is no limitation as such. We do manage a lot of the documents that actually float through this workflow, any of these workflows. So in terms of the number of parts, we have customers using, this part manager many times because the part object is used extensively in all of these different workflows. So they have hundreds, at least we know tens of thousands, approaching 100,000 parts that are in the system. And we do keep track of, for example, all of the documentation that is associated with the part as well, in many cases, because it is needed to support specific workflows. Just to give you an example, if I open A10X or Z4X, so when you look at attachments, you do get a.
Chris, you need to share.
Oh, sorry. Oh, I've stopped sharing. Okay, so here we are looking at a part object. So, for us, a part object is a combination of both design information, supply chain info, inventory, all of that, right? The way NPI teams look at a part, not just a design part. Part of that is, you also have attachments, which can be different types that can be included, dragged and dropped and managed as part of the part itself, part object. But, if you look at it, we are keeping track of individual parts, and these can come from different systems. If you look at it, there's quite a bit of capability here. The reason why we've developed so much capability around parts is NPI teams do a lot of work around parts from a readiness perspective. And they also want to keep track of exactly what is going on, how did the part evolve over time, right? So that's one of the things that we've been supporting to help our customers, or especially the NPI teams, manage and use this information as part of workflows. Okay, so if you look at, so these are all the different parts that are made up, they're going into specific other assemblies. So if I want to look at all the assemblies, so you can see different parts. Yep. Okay. So it is, a lot of our customers primarily come from, high tech, automotive, and medical devices. Those are the three places where we have significant usage. And it is used in conjunction with, like I said, ERP systems, design systems, and really strings together, the different cross-functional teams and even supplier participants into all of these different workflows. Okay. So with that, if there are no more questions, we'll keep it on for a couple more minutes. We will close the session in a couple of minutes and send you all of the materials. So you have the the assets from this session. Please feel free to reach out to us. We'd be more than happy to support a proof of concept or a pilot. All of those are very useful for you to determine, hey, is this something that is going to be helpful for us or not? And that way, you don't have to really take a chance. All of our customers just started off with proofs of concept and pilots and then adopted the solution. All right. With that, we are closing the session today. Again, I want to take the time to thank you for joining this session. I know your schedules are very busy, but we appreciate the fact that you gave us an hour of your time today. Hopefully it was very useful. Again, feel free to reach out to us if you are interested in exploring more on how we may be able to help you achieve new product introduction excellence. Thank you. Have a great day.